You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 216. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. How often do you find yourself procrastinating? You know what I mean. It might be 3 p.m, you're sitting at your computer, you've got an email to write, you don't really feel like writing it, and so you put it off a little bit. Maybe you get up and go grab yourself a glass of water. Maybe you stop by someone's office on your way back to say hello. Then you sit down, you think about the email. Maybe then you go check and see if any new emails have come in. And next thing you know, it's 3:30 and you still haven't written the email, but you've spent the last 30 minutes thinking about it. And now you're upset with yourself. You're feeling a little bit frustrated. Why did you just not write that email? You could have written it and you'd be done by now. You know what I'm talking about. How do I know? Because we all do it. We're all humans. We all procrastinate at some point or another. The purpose of today's episode is to give you a tool that you can use the next time you find yourself procrastinating so that hopefully you can skip over that 30-minute window of pushing time forward without getting the task finished, and instead be able to get started and hopefully complete that task that you have on your plate. So the way we're going to approach today's episode is first, I'm just going to warm up with a few thoughts about procrastination and how it often shows up for lawyers. This is a topic that I often coach on, which is why I'm recording this episode today, because I feel like I have a very similar conversation with my clients, and I'm always really excited to hear that people are procrastinating. I know that's really, really strange. It probably sounds very odd, but I know there's so much we can do about it. And so when someone comes to me and they say, I've had problems procrastinating, there's so many different ways we can approach it. This episode is about mindset. So it's a fairly strategic, specific surgical tool. There are other strategies for fighting procrastination. This is one that I want to give you that's really effective in the moment. And what I find is I'll walk clients through it, and then they've got this really great takeaway that they can apply next time they find themselves procrastinating. So for you, what I'm hoping is that you can imagine yourself in the situations where you are most likely to procrastinate. So I'm going to help you to identify what some of those might be, and then we'll dive into the solution, how you can go about fixing it. Hopefully that resonates with you. I had a lot of fun preparing for today's episode. I came across some really funny quotes, so I'll drop a couple of those into the episode as we go along. One of them is a Spanish proverb that says, tomorrow is often the busiest day of the week. So I like that. What do we like to leave until tomorrow? Apparently a lot. So the problem, of course, is procrastination is not really something that we want. It creates a lot of pain for you. Let's say you've got that email that you're trying to write and you're procrastinating and the hours are going by. It's time that probably feels wasted, and it means you're not getting other things done. It's taking longer for you to do things than you would like. Chances are you're not able to bill for much of this or any of this time if it's true procrastination. And it can also become a pain for the people that you work with. If people are waiting on you to deliver your part of the project and there's delay, there's procrastination, that can cause some upset with them. If they know you haven't started something, they might get nervous for you. They might be thinking, well, I don't know how you're planning to pull that off because it would take me at least X amount of time and we're well past that time. And it can also create a practice that feels really reactive. If you're pushing things off to the last minute, then you tend to be in a state of urgency, maybe panic, maybe stress when you finally do get to do the project. And so it feels very reactive. It may even feel out of control. You might find there's that sense of frustration where you can see yourself doing it. You know you don't want to do it, meaning you don't want to procrastinate, and yet you procrastinate anyways. And next thing you know, you're upset with yourself for having procrastinated. And You might also find that it perpetuates itself because you never really suffer real consequences from procrastinating. So procrastinators will often say to me and to themselves, I like to procrastinate because I do my best work under pressure. And so when I have that time pressure, I just come up with these great ideas, everything gets done, I'm really good at it. And so there's this part of you that doesn't want to let that go. And one of the quotes that I found I thought was quite fitting for this point. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute to do. I mean, there's a lot of people out there procrastinating. If this is anything like you are so not alone. So the solution today is going to be a simple one. It is a mindset trick. And again, my goal is for you to have a tool you can rely on in the moment. Now, I love it because it is a no-cost method to learn more about yourself. So every time you apply this tool, you're actually going to learn about yourself. You're going to learn how you think. You're going to learn what you think. You're going to learn how to maybe change some of those thoughts if you want to. And you'll also get to practice. We get good at what we practice. So if you're able to practice using a mindset tool to overcome procrastination, you can also use this mindset tool to overcome other things as well. Now, in addition to what we're talking about today, I have a lot of different podcast episodes that deal with procrastination. And so if this is a topic that resonates with you, I'd encourage you to download my free podcast roadmap, which outlines all of the episodes I've ever recorded about time management. Well, at least up until a certain point. There might be a few new ones that have squeezed in since then. But there's a whole section in that roadmap about procrastination. So you can actually look and see if any of those flavors of procrastination resonate with you. So executive function and procrastination is one of them, focused really on task initiation. So that's a great one if you're trying to learn more about how your brain works and which of the executive functions are at play, like emotional regulation, task initiation. You could also find episodes about urgency. So a lot of people will tell me, I cannot get motivated without a sense of urgency. So that's in there. I also talk about the idea of procrastination being small p versus big P procrastination. Small p procrastination, the way that I have kind of defined it, is that that's those little tasks. Those are the emails and the almost micro projects, tasks that you need to do as part of your day-to-day functioning, usually at work. I mean, that's the context I'm usually talking about it in. But if you procrastinate at work, chances are you also procrastinate in your real life. I know I do. So that's small p procrastination. It's folding the laundry, taking out the garbage, it's answering those emails, it's starting the draft. Whereas big P procrastination is more in the nature of there is a big decision that you need to make and you are putting that thing off. And big P procrastination might be like a job transition or a house transition. And the reason I call it big P procrastination is that it's a much bigger project. It's not something that you can do just sitting down in an afternoon. And that big P procrastination can sometimes bleed into your day-to-day life and cause small p procrastination. So for example, if you're really unhappy at work and you're procrastinating, that could be a sign that you need some tools to tighten up your time management, or it could be a sign that something's wrong in the bigger picture. And that's what we need to look at in order to solve that small p procrastination. So depending on the flavor of procrastination, there's likely something in that podcast roadmap for you. So I'd encourage you to go and download it. You'll find a link to it in the notes of this episode if that's something that interests you. 3 parts to this method I'm going to teach you today. Very straightforward. Number 1 is know your cues. Number 2 is to understand the tool. There are 3 parts conveniently to the tool itself. And then finally, let's talk about how to apply it. So 3 steps: know your cues. Number 2, understand the tool that I'm teaching you. And then 3, apply it. So let's start with you. Let's start with you, your relationship with procrastination, when you are going to find yourself procrastinating and therefore likely to use the tool we're talking about today. So I broke it down into different categories. The first of the categories is work tasks. So for many of the clients that I work with, there are specific types of work where they find they are most likely to procrastinate. I'm going to share some of the common ones with you. And as I do this, please don't listen passively. Please think actively about how the things that I'm sharing actually relate to you. And if it's not a perfect match for your practice, what is the closest thing? Because what I'm hoping you're doing is creating a mental image in your mind as I'm talking about the tasks that you're most likely to procrastinate on. And if you can, I'd encourage you to even go so far as to imagine where you would be in the moment when you procrastinate. Would you be sitting at your desk looking at your computer? Would you be at your home office or your work office? Does it make a difference? Is there a particular time of day where you're more likely to procrastinate than others? So really put yourself into that space, because what we're doing here is we're setting up some groundwork in advance so that the next time you find yourself procrastinating, you've already rehearsed this mentally, you've already applied this new tool mentally, and that will get you ready to do it in real life, in real time, in real life. So here's a task: document review. So this comes up a lot for litigators, it comes up for solicitors. And sometimes it means reviewing a lot of documents, and the task is typically considered to be a little bit dry or maybe even boring. And that is why you might be pushing it off. You might have that feeling of dread. Ugh, I don't want to do it. It's so dull. It's so boring. It's way more exciting to go online shopping and buy myself a new pair of swim shoes or flip-flops or something. It's the summer right now. I'm thinking, what would I buy? White jeans, actually. It turns out they're really hard to find. Another thing you might procrastinate: court submissions. Now, this is a tricky one. Often with court submissions, and for litigators, court submissions, tribunal submissions, things that go to an adjudicating body, that they all kind of fall into the same category for the purposes of this podcast episode. And for solicitors, I was trying to think of what might be similar for you. My guess is there are all sorts of documents that are very persnickety that you need to complete perfectly, or something bad will happen. So you might ask yourself what those are. And with these types of documents, there is a fear of being judged. And the truth is, you are being judged. If you think about something you draft for a court submission, let's say it's an argument. First of all, you're judging yourself as you write it. And assuming you get past your own scrutiny and allow that document to see the light by someone else's eyes. Maybe it's one of your colleagues who's going to review it, so they're going to judge it. Your client will likely review it and therefore judge it. You may have friendly counsel that you're collaborating with. They may judge it. You're going to send it over to opposing counsel. They are absolutely going to judge it. And of course, the decision maker, the judge, the adjudicator, they are also going to judge that piece of writing. So you are being judged. And when you know you're being judged, that can also bring up emotions of fear. This is often where perfectionists freeze. So there's a relationship between perfectionism and procrastination. This type of scenario is one where that will often come up. Other things where you might procrastinate: difficult conversations. If you need to have a conversation with somebody where you're worried that they're going to be disappointed or they're going to be angry, chances are you feel kind of nervous and uncomfortable about that conversation and therefore push it off. So you might think about conversations about boundaries. If you're trying to set some limits around your work, that might be something you push off. Maybe you need to talk to somebody about a deadline. You need an extension from a client, from a colleague. Again, you don't want to do it. And deadlines are kind of tricky because if it's a deadline, especially, and we're talking about procrastination, that could be really uncomfortable. You might be trying to have a conversation about money. Maybe it's a conversation where you need to talk to a client about an invoice or something similar. And so that might bring up these feelings of discomfort and awkwardness. And so you just keep pushing it off so you don't have the conversation. Another thing you might put off: recording your time. It feels tedious. It's uncomfortable. You might be one of those people where no matter what the number is you're writing on your timesheet, you feel unhappy about it. If the number is really low, you feel concerned and worried because you're never going to hit your billing target. If the number is too high, you're also worried and concerned because you feel like you've spent way too much time doing the work and someone else would have done it faster. So you start to have those feelings of self-doubt and dread. Complex tasks. these are also really nice to push off into the future, especially when the task feels so heavy and complicated and overwhelming that you don't know where to start. So you just don't start at all. There's the category of work that is not urgent, but important. So things like planning, maybe business development, things that you could do that would set you up for success in the long run, but the failure of which to do presently will not have any immediate consequences. Those types of things, the not urgent but important tasks. And then finally, not billable tasks, things that you need to do that are not billable. So again, it might be business development. It might be some other form of non-billable activity where you push it off because you're not getting an immediate reward. So those are work tasks. Other things you might procrastinate or other times you might procrastinate might be more situational. For example, a lot of lawyers that I have spoken to struggle with the period after a stretch of high exertion. For a lawyer, this might mean you were in trial or had a multiple day hearing. And right after that, you are a vegetable. It's really hard to get anything done. Not only are you tired from having exerted yourself mentally, physically, through the rigors of trial, but then the things on your desk, chances are they're not always the most exciting. I've had that experience before after being in court. The things that you have to do back at the office sometimes feel very tedious, relatively boring, and most often not nearly as urgent as what you're used to. And so it takes a lot of energy to overcome that initial hurdle and actually get started. The same I have heard, although I'm much less familiar with, is true for solicitors who have big closings. You've got this period of intensity and then you're back at work. And again, because you've been working so intensely and the hours have been long and so you're tired and the things that you're now doing don't seem as urgent, it can be really hard to get started. You might also find there's times of day that you procrastinate. So for me, I would say that 3 o'clock window between about maybe 2:45, if we're getting really precise, 2:45 and 4:15, that window where you're in that zone of low energy, or at least I am, takes me a long time to do things. It takes me a long time to get started, and I can pretty much count on that, which is why I will schedule strategically. Scheduling is a way of dealing with procrastination. It's beyond the scope of this podcast episode, but it's another tool. Finally, after a vacation, you might find it hard to get back to work, especially if your vacation was really relaxing, you fully unplugged. It takes a while to get back into the groove. And then lastly, I have you. So if you're feeling tired, you didn't sleep well the night before, you're feeling burnt out because you've been working really hard and not getting enough rest, and your life is starting to feel like one giant wall of work. If you're feeling doubtful, that feeling of self-doubt, or the thing you're about to do is really hard, maybe you feel anxious that you're going to be judged, that your arguments can be torn to shreds, etc. All these things influence whether or not you procrastinate or get things done. So that is the first thing that we're going to want to do when it comes to figuring out how to solve for procrastination in the moment, is to know what your cues are. What are your triggers? Where are the situations where you can already anticipate that you will procrastinate? Because we want to have you imagining yourself in that scenario and then not procrastinating. One of the best examples that comes to mind for me to illustrate the power of having that forecasted vision, that forecasted visualization, is a story I read about a famous deep sea diver. Now, I have no idea who she is because I don't really follow the world of deep sea divers, but I do remember this article very clearly because it talked about how this woman would do these really dangerous deep sea dives, and she managed to deal with some really hairy situations. And the reason she was able to do that is because before she ever went deep underneath into the sea, 200, 300 meters deep, whatever it was, she practiced visually what she would do in basically every scenario that could possibly go wrong. So in her mind, she'd already been in a situation where the oxygen tank stopped working, or I don't know, something else bad happened. She lost her ability to see because the lights went out. I don't know, whatever could happen to you when you're that far beneath the surface of the water. So we're kind of doing the same thing, although it's much less dangerous. You're not going to be in a life-threatening situation, I hope, but you do want to use the power of imagining yourself solving the problem before you ever have to solve it, because by the time you get there, you will be trained, in effect, to do that as well. And there's studies that show that visualization is actually really powerful, and in some cases, as powerful as doing the thing, which is really fascinating. So the tool that we're going to use is a combination of understanding the relationship between how you think, feel, and act. This is typically an unconscious thing where you think a certain way and then feel somehow as a result, and that feeling is what motivates your action. So some people talk about emotion and motion coming from that emotion, if you want to link those two together. So there's this relationship between your thoughts, feelings, and actions. You'll see this in any materials on cognitive behavioral therapy. We are not doing therapy here, but we're taking that tool to help you overcome procrastination. And the way I like to imagine it, and for you, you're imagining, because we're not having a visual conversation. This is purely me speaking and you listening. Thank you, by the way, is to imagine there's a triangle, and that triangle has obviously 3 vertices. One has a T for thought, one has an F for feeling, one has an A for action. And you can imagine that the thoughts and the feelings and the actions are all related. There's arrows that go in both directions between those 3 letters. So the way you think affects how you feel affects how you act, and how you act can also affect how you feel and how you think. This is why you'll often hear people say, smile before you pick up the phone, because people can sense that. You might also notice that once you are engaged in a task, if you've initiated, then momentum has already been built and you're able to complete the task. So depending on your flavor of procrastination, depending on the challenges you have with task completion, sometimes just initiating a task is enough. That action is enough. But because we're talking about procrastination, that's where we have the hold up here, is the action isn't happening, which means we need to either poke at the feelings or we need to poke at the thoughts. And what I'm going to offer today is poking at the thoughts in order to fuel the action through the feeling or directly to the action itself. So that's the first thing, is let's look at that relationship between thoughts, feelings, and actions. Imagine it again as a triangle where influencing your thoughts and feelings will then lead to your actions. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples to illustrate this. So let's go back to that brief. You're about to submit it to the court. This submission, we know the thought that you may be having is it's going to be judged. Imagine what you're thinking in that situation. If you're a solicitor and you never write documents that go to court, think about those documents that are going to be scrutinized. So you're thinking it's going to be judged. You might also be thinking it won't be good enough. They'll find out I'm not good enough. That classic imposter syndrome. So there's all sorts of things that people think. And it's usually along those lines. If you're procrastinating, it's not usually, oh, I'm so excited to do this. I can't wait. It's going to be amazing. It's usually, it's going to be terrible and I don't want to do it. So that's the thought. And then what we want to do is channel, really get into our bodies and identify the feeling that arises when we think that way. So it's going to be judged. You might start to feel a bit anxious, a sense of nervousness. If you're thinking it won't be good enough, you might start feeling a bit of self-doubt. You might feel dread. Again, you might feel anxious. If you have that even deeper thought, ooh, maybe they'll figure out I'm not good enough. I mean, that could invoke shame. It could invite really almost feelings of greater self-doubt. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can come from those thoughts, which then leads to this action. And the action often is to escape that discomfort. What is the quickest thing you can do to get yourself out of that awful situation where you feel so uncomfortable? How do you get relief the fastest? And in that case, it might be to avoid the task. You push it to some point in the future. Let's push it to tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow is the busiest day of the week for a reason. Maybe you distract yourself. You can distract yourself by going online, checking for other emails, going onto your social media, checking the news, whatever it is, to take that thought away from you so that you can focus on something else that is less painful. You might do procrastinate research. That's a great one. It sounds really legitimate and important, but it might get you absolutely nowhere closer toward your goal. You might go into your emails and start answering them because it feels good, it feels productive, but again, it's not getting you anywhere closer to your goal. And sometimes, I've done this before, so there's no judgment here, but sometimes it is so physically uncomfortable, you need to stand up, walk away from your desk. And if you're working in an office context, you might walk over to somebody and start to complain because it feels good. It gets it off your chest. And now, unfortunately, the task itself still isn't getting done. So that was the example using the submission to court. Now we can use another example, recording time. Again, this is an area where lawyers often will procrastinate and they feel really badly about it. And they know because they've been told 1,000 times that when you procrastinate on timekeeping, you're only causing yourself more trouble. It takes longer to reconstruct the time in the future. Chances are, if you're reconstructing in the future, you are also recording less time than you actually spent on the task. Your descriptions may not be as accurate because your memory has faded. You might not even have a record of how much time you spent initially, and you may be going through your emails or asking your assistant to go through your emails to try to piece together how many point threes, point ones, hours, whatever measurement you're using, you spent on a given project on a given day. So we know that the consequences of not recording time reasonably contemporaneously is significant. And yet you might still find that you procrastinate. And if you do, again, you are not alone. And so let's look at that from this model again, the thought, feeling, action model. You might be thinking, it's going to take forever. I don't have enough billable hours. Going back to that example of the person who feels kind of crummy either way. If your hours are too low, you might feel like you're not meeting target. You may have been at the office for 8 to 10 hours, and yet your timesheet reflects 2.3 hours, and you're wondering, where did the rest of my time go? Or you might be thinking, it took me way too long. You spent 5.6 hours drafting said email, but really, did it need to take that long to write the email? And so you start kind of almost berating yourself, doubting yourself, somebody else would have written it faster, etc. You might also be telling yourself, I should have done this last week. I should have done these time entries last week. Everybody's always telling me how this is crazy. I'm losing time, wasting time, etc. So now you're beating yourself up over not recording your time. And so the feelings start to show up. Dread of having to sit down and do this tedious work, overwhelm because you don't even know where to start, anxiety because you have too few hours, shame over taking way too long and having too many hours. So you can see how, again, that discomfort really piles up. And so you want to do anything to avoid it, which is why you make the perfectly rational decision to avoid it. I'll do this tomorrow. There you are. This is how procrastination happens. If this is you on any level, you're not alone. I did not make these examples up out of thin air. I mean, I can base this on my experience of clients that I've worked with. This is super common, which is why it's so nice to have some tools and a framework now where you can start to break it down. It's not this kind of glob of a problem. We can bring it from the unconscious, what might be happening beneath the surface, into the conscious so we can actually address it and deal with it. Again, this is one of the reasons why I love this tool, is that it allows you to see what you're thinking. And then that brings us to the next phase of our strategy. So the first was know your cues. Number 2 is understand what's happening here on the basis of the way you're thinking, feeling, and acting, or in this case, not acting. And then finally, we want to then shift. And so this is the next section in the application of the tool. We're going to shift at the thought level. So before we do that, I just want to say a couple more things about that relationship between thoughts, feelings, and actions. So number 1, this is often unconscious. So as I mentioned a moment ago, this is always happening, but we might not see it because we haven't really been taught to use a framework to actually analyze it. So that's what we're doing now. We're raising awareness of the way that you think, feel, and act. This is mindfulness. When you hear people talking about mindfulness, this is a big part of it, is simply awareness of the fact that your thoughts are driving your actions. It also is, I think, useful to note that this way of being, if we're just kind of letting our unconscious programming run the show, it can lead to compounding negative results. So as we've seen in some of these examples, the more we push things off, the less time we have to do it in the end. And by the time we get to the task, if we leave it to the last minute, we only have a minute to get it done, chances are we're doing that work in a state of heightened anxiety, in which case you're not really able to access your full creativity. So yes, you may have the benefits of your stress response to motivate you and to help you focus and be efficient and get the job done, but you don't have access to the broader creativity the bigger picture thinking, time to reflect, time to refine, time to edit. And so you may not be delivering your best product. And what you might also find is that you prove yourself to be true. So if your fear going into the brief writing exercise is that it's never going to be good enough, and then you don't give yourself enough time to do it properly, the brief itself may not be good enough. You can see how it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Or you might look at the timesheets and you might say, it's going to take forever. And if you put it off and put it off and put it off, then by the time you do get to your timesheets, as we've discussed, it really might take forever to get them done. I mean, hopefully not forever in the true infinite meaning of the word, but it will take longer. So we want to be conscious of all of this. Now, we also can notice when we feel good. If we're not procrastinating, why are we not procrastinating? What's different about those situations? Do you feel more confident? Are you having more positive thoughts about it? Is the work more engaging? If it's more engaging, why is it more engaging? Can you get more of that type of work? And the other part of it too is, okay, we've looked at the feeling. How are you feeling about certain projects? And then you might also look at the action part of it too. Once you are in action, chances are you're going to stay there, and getting started is enough. So if you focus on using this tool simply to initiate, then that might be enough to get you through the day. How do we apply this tool? We want to apply it the next time you catch yourself procrastinating. So I'm hoping for you that you procrastinate really soon. Well, this is still fresh in your mind. I'm sorry. That's not a nice thing to wish for you, but I really want you to apply it, because once you start applying it, you'll get better at applying it and you will procrastinate less and you will feel so much happier. What you need to know is that you will be investing time to save time. And the more you practice this tool, the more it's going to become second nature. So I talked about changing the thought. How do you go about doing that? Number one is you need to understand the truth about your thoughts. You have, according to some studies, 60,000 thoughts every single day. And I've heard references to studies where that number is higher. I've heard references where the number is lower. Suffice it to say, you have a lot of thoughts that are being generated in your brain. And most of those thoughts are not true. Many of those thoughts are negative and erroneous. Some people call them automatic negative thoughts, or ants. Some people call them unhelpful thinking patterns or distorted thought patterns. Basically, there are categories of thoughts that are common among humans, and they are simply thought distortions. So some examples of that are all or nothing thinking. So you might think, okay, well, if I can't do the whole project, there's no point in getting started because it won't be finished. That's that very black and white, all or nothing thinking. It's really common among perfectionists. There are should statements. So anytime you tell yourself, I should be able to do this in less time, I should have started last week, I should know better, should, it is could plus shame. Again, this is a false way of thinking. This is a classic unhelpful thinking style, which may or may not be true. Should you have started earlier? Well, you didn't start earlier. Therefore, you should not have. How do we know? Because you didn't. And that comes directly from the teachings of Byron Katie. She's got some really fascinating work around should statements and the truth of your thoughts. So you can check her out as well if this is something that is interesting to you. Another example is mind reading. So you anticipate what someone else is going to think, and maybe you're right, but maybe you're not right. We don't actually know until that person actually comes face to face with what it is you're going to tell them. And my guess is you've had experiences where people respond exactly the way you thought they would. And you've probably also had experiences where you dreaded the conversation and it was no big deal. So mind reading is also an automatic negative thought. Generalization is also, I think that's, to me, it's a flavor of all or nothing thinking, but where you take one example and then you say, well, it's always, right? I'm always late. It always takes me forever. I'm always the last one to do X. So just notice the way that you're talking, the way that you're talking to yourself, the way that you're thinking. And when you start to get onto yourself, then you will start to notice where the thoughts are these automatic negative thoughts, and that will help you to chip away at them. So you want to understand the truth about your thoughts, the things you think are not always true,
This might be a real eye-opener, especially as a lawyer where you're paid for your thinking. Your thoughts, some of them are extremely high quality and extremely valuable. And some of your thoughts are not. And so sometimes it can be a bit of an eye-opener, something that maybe we resist. And yet it's how we are programmed as humans, which, as far as I know, everyone listening is still human. Number 2 is let's notice what you're currently telling yourself. So what are your favorite thoughts? And I've broken it into 2 different flavors. One is statements. Statements are things that you tell yourself, like sentences. So you'll notice that you have your favorite go-tos when you start to pay attention to them. So it's too hard. It will take too long. It's going to be boring. I should have started last week. I don't know what I'm doing. They're going to hate it. These are all examples of statements that might appear in your mind when you are procrastinating. Now, the thoughts might also come in the form of questions. And if you're procrastinating, I'm going to say these are bad questions. Not that there are good questions and bad questions. I mean, aren't all questions on some level good? But these are bad questions because they're creating a situation where you're procrastinating. And they're often questions that invite a pretty negative answer. For example, why did I wait this long to get started? Is a bad question because if you answer that question, well, the reason that I waited so long is because I'm disorganized and lazy and a procrastinator and I'm too scared and I should have set boundaries, but I didn't. So, these are not helpful statements. I mean, if we go back to how they make you feel, well, they probably don't make you feel very good. And so again, to avoid the discomfort, you do something to relieve that discomfort, which probably isn't the work on your plate. Another bad question, why do I have to do this? I mean, you think of document review. Why do I have to do this? And it's this victim mode. Again, the answer probably isn't a really positive one. Well, I'm the low person on the totem pole. I'm the most junior lawyer, or I was the only person who wasn't working on that really great file that everybody else is working on. And so of course I'm going to be. So you can see how the bad questions are giving you more fuel for this procrastination fire, if you want to call it that. Another question, how did this become my life? Really dramatic, maybe a bit catastrophic. So I think that's another one of those categories, catastrophizing, when you take something relatively small and you turn it into a bigger problem than it is. How can I get out of this, right? Sometimes you'll find yourself negotiating if you've got kids. And frankly, I think adults do this all of the time. Well, I won't start it now, but I'll start it first thing tomorrow morning. I promise. It's that, how can I get out of this? So again, not helpful if it leads to you procrastinating. What we've done here, we've understood that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not facts. Number 2, we have also noticed that you have messages that you're telling yourself, whether it's statements or questions that lead to some pretty unhelpful answers. And then we want to notice how the way you're thinking influences your thoughts and feelings. So again, we've kind of covered this already. Dread, overwhelm, fear, despair, resulting in avoidance, pushing the task to the future, doing anything to relieve yourself in the short term. And so what we want to do here is to go to that thought. You can think of it as the root of the problem and replace it with a better one. So I'm going to give you some examples of what that can look like. So if the thought is, I don't know what I'm doing, you might tell yourself, I have done hard things. I can do this too. Or you might say, I don't know what I'm doing yet. Yet is a wonderful word. The world of yet is a wonderful world. The word yet is a wonderful add-on to any statement like that. I don't know what I'm doing yet. If you are not familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, Google that, Power of Yet. You'll learn all sorts of great things. Growth mindset. Another example, it's going to be so boring. Now, this may be true, but you can also think, I'll feel so good when it's done. And if you couple it, it's going to be so boring, and I'll feel so great when it's done. That is actually a trick that I learned when I was doing some training and was taught, I believe it's dialectic behavioral therapy, which is this idea. And again, I'm not teaching you how to be a therapist. I'm not suggesting that I am a therapist, but it's a tool that you can use to help overcome procrastination. And the basic idea here is holding 2 thoughts to be true at the same time, where you're accepting a negative and then coupling it with a positive. So I know it's going to be so boring and I'll feel so great when it's done. You can use this with your children. Child doesn't want to go to bed, but they have to go to bed. So I know you don't want to go to bed, and you'll feel so much better when you wake up in the morning, something like that. You can Google it and find all sorts of information about that. Dialectic behavioral therapy. Another example, I don't have enough time to finish. Why bother starting? I mean, that is such a good one. I know I've done that before. I tend to be better at that now. That becomes, I only need to do one thing or spend 10 minutes on this. And there's a little sub hack going on here. Whenever you're overwhelmed by a task and you're procrastinating for that reason, the trick, or a really effective trick, is to break down the task and to break down the time that you're spending on that task. So if it's a task, you want to chop it up into small pieces and just start with one. And if you've got a chunk of time where you could work on it, I do recommend setting a timer for a relatively digestible amount of time. Now, that will depend on your definition of digestible, whether that's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And the whole purpose of that is simply to get you started. It's to break down a task to make it step by step. It's less overwhelming. It's more clear. You can focus better. But again, that's another strategy. And what I'm really focusing on today is mindset. Another message you might tell yourself, it's way too complicated. And instead of that, you might just say, I only need to produce a first draft. You might be telling yourself, I don't know where to start. Instead, you might say, I just need to create an outline. And then questions. If you were using these bad questions that were leading you to bad answers that were frightening you and causing dread and other dreadful emotions that cause procrastination, questions. So instead of, why is this happening to me? You can ask yourself, how am I the perfect person to do this? I mean, isn't that such a better question? How am I the perfect person to do this? Well, maybe you've got special training, you've got unique experience, you've got more patience than anybody else, and so you can figure it out. Ask yourself that question, you'll get a pretty good answer. Why did I wait so long? That becomes, what's one thing I could do? So you're no longer beating yourself up over the past. Instead, you're looking at the future and how can you move forward? Where do I even begin? Has this dramatic desperation to it? What about what's one thing that would have the greatest impact? And then what we want to do is, with that brand new thought, something that is believable to you. It can't be something that's so outlandish that you just think it's rubbish and ignore it. If it's something that you can actually connect to, you'll probably feel relief. You may feel willing to get started. You might feel more focused. You might even feel strategic. You might feel not hopeless. The bar doesn't have to be that high. You might even reach a higher bar. Like you might even be able to work your way up to confidence and powerful. And then what happens as a result? You take action. You draft the outline. Maybe it's a small step forward. If it's a conversation you're dreading, you might schedule the meeting. If it's a brief you're writing, you might create a new document. If it's the email, you might start drafting it. So all you really need to do is get started. So that is the tool in a nutshell. Well, in detail. So I'm about to tell you what it is in a nutshell, which is the recap. First is to identify when you're going to procrastinate. So hopefully, as we've been talking through these different ideas, you've been able to see yourself in the examples and how you can apply them to you. You now understand that there's this connection. You can think of that triangle, the TFA triangle, and how your thoughts, feelings, and actions all affect each other. And then we're going in like surgeons to that thought vertice on, is that what it's called? The vertice on the triangle. And we're going to change it. We're going to tinker with it until we get the right thought that produces the right feelings and the right actions. And that's going to get you over that hurdle of getting started and procrastinating. So some additional comments here. You can expect this to be hard at first. Number one, it's not something you've practiced. So you might have to come back to this episode. You might have to write down the model for yourself. You might want to be writing down your thoughts at the very beginning to see them on paper. It's really helpful as a mindfulness practice. Again, if you can externalize your thoughts and look at them as an observer, you're going to create distance from them. You'll be able to find a greater sense of calm. You can then have greater ability to manipulate your thoughts. And by manipulate, I don't mean in a negative sense. I mean in a proactive, conscious, deliberate, intentional way. You're no longer at the mercy of whatever it is that your brain is offering to you, those 60,000 random thoughts, some of which are true, some of which are not, many of which are negative and unhelpful. You've now got much more agency because you have that intentionality. So that'll be hard at first. You're creating a new habit. It's a new practice. And chances are you're building up new neural pathways. So what you may have heard, neurons that fire together, wire together. So if you have practices and habits that you do repeatedly, those get hardwired. And if right now you're hardwired to procrastinate, it's going to take some energy for you to get out of that and to move yourself into a default non-procrastinator. More comments? Be really kind to yourself. This whole exercise is a wonderful opportunity to practice compassion and more gentle self-talk. So instead of kicking yourself and berating yourself for procrastinating, try to have a more compassionate approach. Oh yeah, I can understand why you're procrastinating. I can understand why you wouldn't want to review 1,000 documents over the next 3 days. It makes sense. Lots of people would feel like that, and it's okay. And you're going to feel so much better when it's done. And all we need to do is figure out a plan to do it step by step. We'll break it down into sections. Maybe you have some milestones along the way. Maybe you build in some rewards. All of it is doable. So we want to be kind to yourself. And then finally, we want to use this as an opportunity to learn about you. We talked about uncovering these thoughts. It's wonderful. If you can actually see how you're thinking and feeling about these tasks, we can address it. Is there a skills problem? If you're writing a brief and you're feeling like, I'm just not good at it, or you're preparing for discoveries and you feel like you're in over your head, or you've got a hearing coming up and you want some support, then maybe there's some other steps you can take. Maybe there's training to develop skills. Maybe there's mentors you could seek out. Maybe what you're finding is that there's something else that's happening. It might be happening at a motivation level and you want to work with a coach. You can work with me. I'd love to help you with this. You might find that maybe there's something a bit deeper and you want to work with a counselor, in which case there are some brilliant counselors who can help you with this. If it's anxiety or depression or something where it's really keeping you from moving forward. So this is great awareness that comes through doing exercises like this. So again, we can thank procrastination because it's revealing to you all these things about yourself that you now have the opportunity to learn. And what I think is the biggest transformation that you can make when it comes to procrastination is the self-concept. So if right now you're identifying yourself as a procrastinator, this is a really great opportunity to let that self-concept go and work your way toward the self-concept of a person who gets things done. And that might be something that takes a bit of time to actually fully realize and feel like it's true for you. But that to me is where the coaching work can be really powerful, is where you're able to let go of a former version of yourself and step into a new one. And often it's through that consistent practice of everyday events that over time lead to these really profound changes. So this could be a really great opportunity for you to start creating in yourself that shift in self-concept. And if you can do it around procrastination, what else? What other areas might you want to do that with? Next time you feel the urge to procrastinate, you know what to do. I would love for you to apply the tool that we talked about today. Please tell me what it was like for you. I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you would like further support, if you'd like to go deeper into procrastination, if you'd like to go into other areas of time management to really tighten up your practice, to feel like you are more in control, maybe it's a big P question and you're wondering, are you on the right track? Then 100% reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. Send me a DM on LinkedIn. You can send me an email. There's a submission form on my website. There's all sorts of ways you can reach me. So do that. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you once again for joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye for now.
If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.